Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop Podcast. And this week, we have a super cool guest on, one Mr. Marc Urselli. Marc Urselli has worked with a phenomenal array of artists, really big ones like U2, Lou Reed, Nick Cave. He's worked with Jeff Beck and Keith Richards. He's also worked with on a lot of kind of avant-garde stuff, really cutting-edge stuff like John Zorn. He's done almost, I think, more than 100 records with John Zorn's Exotic label. He's worked with Mike Patton extensively of Faith No More. And one of the interesting things I want to talk to Marc about is he spends a lot of time in the studio in New York City where he's based, but he also spends a lot of time traveling the world doing live sound in front of house with some of these same big established artists he's worked with. And it's just something we haven't talked about a lot on the Sonic Scoop podcast yet. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, kind of comparing and contrasting the world of mixing and working in live sound compared to being in the studio, what you can take from one discipline to another. For those of you who have done live sound work and want to start getting into the studio, or vice versa, we'll talk about some of the opportunities there and some of the ways to cross over your technique from one field to the other. Marc, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Sonic Scoop Podcast. How you doing?
Happy to be here. It's been a while since my last Sonic Scoop video.
That's right. We did something at MixCon. You actually gave a presentation at MixCon. I think Mick DSP were sponsoring that one, where you really took us through your template, your setup for your mixes. It was
That's
with
correct.
a pretty heavy band. It started with an O.
Yeah, it was
Trying to remember.
Orc, O-R-K.
Orc, that's right. I want to say Oxes, which is another very cool heavy rock band I knew in the 2000s, but Orc. And we opened up that track, and you showed us all of the work that goes into mixing before you even start mixing, which I think was really useful.
Yeah, I got a lot of requests about that template and the way I work in the box. That was about working in the box versus working in the analog world, which obviously is two things I both do.
Yeah, of course. Well, we'll get into a lot of that and a whole lot more. And I'll also link to that bigger MixCon talk you gave in the show notes for anyone who wants to check that out. There'll be a direct link to the YouTube video there. But before we get into today's topic, what do I have to do? The thing that I always do, which is give you your 90 seconds or so of pure, absolute, unadulterated bliss. What I shout out this week's sponsors. They are SonarWorks sponsoring this week. SonarWorks, for those of you guys who don't know them, they make room, speaker, and headphone correction systems that will allow you to hear things more transparently than ever before. Practically any set of headphones you get, they have made, it's almost like an impulse response for those headphones, where they have figured out the idiosyncrasies of those headphones, and then you can put on this plugin in your DAW that automatically corrects for the color of your headphones. They can do the same kind of thing to your room and or your speakers as well. So great thing to check out. I'll talk about them more later on in the show. Other quick shout outs this week to Focusrite. Thanks for sponsoring. If you're enjoying the lovely sound of my voice through the Shure SM7B, it is in no small part because I'm talking to you through a Focusrite Claret interface. They really do make, I think, in my opinion, some of the most kind of robust bang for the buck stuff. Really great stuff from the very entry level of the Scarlett line all the way up to the fancy high-end RedNet series. Last, certainly not least, Eventide, makers of some of the wackiest, weirdest, most interesting effects in the history of the known universe. Check them out at Eventide Audio, where you can get anything they make for free to try out. You can't like have them forever for free, but you can try them for like 15 days for free. So go do that. All right, enough of my jibba jabba. Mr. Marc Urselli, how are things in New York today? Is it a beautiful autumn day down there?
It's a beautiful autumn day. I don't know how many of those we will still have, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to London next week anyway.
All right, I was about to say it's a good thing you're an optimist, apparently. They never get any nice days in London. I don't think they exist over there, do they?
They do, mostly between July and August, I think.
You get a smattering of them in between the raindrops. Is a good day every now and then.
Yeah.
Now, question for you. You do a lot of traveling. How much of the year do you think you spend in New York?
You know, I've never added it up, but I think at this point, it's probably 50-50. I live between New York and London. I have an apartment in London. I do studio work in London and live work. That's why I'm going next week. It's still, I think, leaning on the New York side, though.
Gotcha. And you just got off a couple of big tours, I think, with both John Zorn and Mike Patton this summer. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were doing and where those tours took you?
Yeah, absolutely. June and July, I was out with John Zorn doing his Bagatelle Marathon project, which is a 4.5-hour-long concert with 25 musicians split into 12 or 14 bands. Each band plays 20 minutes. So there's 11 stage changes. So it's quite
Wow.
challenging thing to mix.
Yeah.
And it's very long, and my days were always 18 hours, but it's, for John Zorn, I do it. He's great. He's a genius.
That's how you get hired 100 times by a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Or more than 100 with him.
Yes.
And then I also did a tour with Mike Patton. It was a very short tour, only 2 dates and a rehearsal with his project called Mondo Cane, which is basically a 25-piece band plus orchestra of strings. And he sings Italian music from the
Really?
50s, 60s, and 70s, traditional, basically crooner type music from Italy. Really beautifully arranged, really super great band, and we did 2 sold-out shows in a square and in a theater.
And this is the Mike Patton, the same Mike Patton of
course.
Faith No More.
Of
Wow.
course, he's
I did
super.
not know about this project. I gotta check it out. That's
Yeah,
wild.
he's super creative and versatile. He really can go on the same show if he wanted to, from screaming his lungs out and doing stuff like he does in his project Dead Cross or Mr. Bungle that are touring again soon, to crooner stuff. He's got a beautiful voice, perfect pitch, amazing.
Wild. Yeah. I don't think everybody knew that about him. I'm definitely going to check out this project. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about your path into this stuff. Did you start out in live sound and then migrate to the studio, or vice versa? Or were you always doing both from the beginning?
I pretty much did both from the beginning. I started when I was 16 or 17 with my interest in audio. Started recording the rehearsals of my band, started buying equipment to do that in a better way. And then as soon as the word got out that I was recording, and as soon as I started recording other people, I started getting calls for live sound, for concerts. And I think at the time I lived in Italy, and I think there was partly, I know, cultural probably differences, or just plain ignoring the fact that there's 2 categories of live sound engineer and studio engineer. It's kind of like you get bundled up into the engineer role, and the engineer is almost assumed to do both. And so I got thrown into doing both, and that's been great, because that lack of distinction actually made me super comfortable in doing both, because I developed them both parallel to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I ended up doing a similar thing when I was in New York. I wanted to be a studio guy, and that was the thing that was attractive to me. But at a certain point, you start working with bands, and they trust you, and you develop a rapport, and they don't want to deal with the front of the house guy at the venue, and they try to call on someone that they know. They know that you know where the guitar solos are, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And yeah, I ended up doing a lot of, like, say, 50-50, between studio and live early on. And especially in a place like New York, I mean, there's a concert happening every night of the week. And there's a lot of working
Try
engineers.
50 or 100 every night of the week.
Yes, that's right. I
And I
definitely
go to
undersold that
about
one.
2 or 3 every night myself to check out live music.
All right, man, living the life.
What you say is exactly correct, because that's how, for example, I started doing live sound for John Zorn. We started working in the studio first, and then he was like, well, you really get my sound. Why don't you come do live sound for me? And that's how it developed. Like in your case, it started from the studio. But sometimes it's the other way around. With Lou Reed, I started live first, and then we went into the studio later.
Right, interesting. So when you're doing stuff in the studio, obviously you work out of a few studios, but you don't work out of as many studios as you do venues. So one of the things with live sound when you're doing front of house is, especially in the kind of things you're doing with tours, where you're not just the house sound guy at some venue, you have to figure out a different room every night of the week that you're doing a show practically. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you get acclimated with a new space and make sure that you can get the best results out of a new venue you've never been to before?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the rule of thumb is getting there early. Get there before the band gets there so that you can listen to the room. And I always basically try to listen to a couple of tracks that I know really well. I primarily listen to tracks that I've recorded and mixed because I know how they're supposed to sound, and then to maybe 1 or 2 things that I haven't recorded or mixed but sound great, like AC/DC. That's always a great track to use to test your PAs. And then I basically listen to the PA and try to EQ it to my liking. And I find, I mean, it's an obvious thing to say, but I find that if you get it to sound the way you expect it to sound, then getting your mix across will be so much easier and so much faster.
And you're doing that while listening to music that you're familiar with. You have that up in the mains, and then you're making EQ changes while hearing tunes that you've heard in a bunch of different venues.
Correct. I make EQ changes on the master of the PA. Hopefully the PA is lined up properly and working properly. And if everything is a go, then you're ready for the band.
Sure. And you're using like a 32 or 64 band EQ that would just be there in the venue, or do you have your own tools that you bring when you do front of
No,
house?
I mean, it depends on the size of the tour. If it's a smaller tour, you get there and you have to use what's there. And that's part of being a good sound engineer, a live sound engineer. If you are on a bigger production where you can carry your own stuff, then obviously you can choose different stuff like a Lake processor or doing your EQ on the board. On a big tour like I was doing with Lou Reed, we had our own processors, our own front of house and monitor consoles, and I would basically have a system engineer that would go there, make sure the PA is lined up properly, do all the main EQing the way he liked it, and then I would do adjustments the way I liked it on the consoles EQ.
Interesting. So, when you say on the console's EQ, it can be a somewhat kind of broader EQ. It's not necessarily about getting in there with a graphic EQ and ringing out spots. It's about creating an overall kind of curve for the room and system, or how do you
Yes,
approach
yeah,
it?
both. I mean, basically when I mean consoles EQ, I mean that I put a 31 band stereo EQ on the master
Oh,
bus, and then
yeah,
I
gotcha.
put one on the subwoofer send, and I
Mhm.
make sure that I get what I need from both of them together. Yeah, I mean it's a combination of both. If you have a good system engineer and a good processor, half of that is already been done for you when you get there.
Yeah, good stuff. And when you're working at bigger and more established venues, then there's a lot less that, yeah, you have to do from the first moment. But how long do you think that part of the process should take in an ideal world? What do you think is a comfortable amount of time to spend on that side of things before you kind of get down into the sound checks and line checks and all that?
Assuming that everything works and that you're not
Yes,
going
that's the
into a
assumption.
situation where things don't work,
Yeah,
assuming that everything works, I mean, a half hour should be plenty. Even
right.
honestly, I can do it in 10, 15 minutes. But if you have a half hour, you can listen to the room from different positions, especially if it's a big place. If it's an arena or a theater with balconies, you want to be able to have time to climb up, to go to the different balconies to listen. And you might have to run down and start the thing a couple times to do so.
Yeah.
So it can take half hour.
One of the tricky things for me in doing front of house back in the day was going to venues where things would sound so much different in the front of house mixing position than they would anywhere else in the room. I remember one of the most significant versions of this was the Highline Ballroom at some point way back in the day. Went in there and you're practically sitting in a bass trap and you're like, oh my God, there's so much low end here. Let me turn it all down. And then you go out into the floor and it's like, where's all the low end? Where did it go? You know? So those kinds of things can happen where you have these weak spots and dead spots and all of that. How do you kind of deal with that when you know things are going to sound different at the main mix spot than it might in many other parts of the room?
You just have to adjust. I mean, unfortunately, there's no tool to prevent that from happening. If you're sitting in a bass trap because you are under the balcony, which happens very often in theaters, then you just have to account for that. You have to go past the bass trap, go listen to what people are going to be listening to, and make sure to mix accordingly. When you're,
Gotcha.
make sure that if there's too much low end where you are, you just have to live with it. In other words, otherwise everyone else is gonna, and you just have to remember, okay, that's sounding like that because of what I'm hearing here, and you have to endure it for the, you know.
Yeah, what I always discovered is as much as it is about tuning the room, and tuning things with an EQ, it's also about tuning yourself to the room and, knowing what to expect by walking around and getting a sense for, okay, when things are going to sound right for everyone in the audience, here's how it should sound at the mix position. And it might not always be, let me make it sound perfect here at the mix position. It might be, well, let me make it sound perfect minus or plus 3 dB of low end. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, you have
yeah, yeah.
to you have to get used to it.
Now, earlier in your career, did you ever do the whole thing where you were a monitor mixer, or did you dive right into front of house from moment one?
Yeah, no, front of house is my thing, and I really hate doing monitors. So
Well, you get the most annoying audience members possible when you're doing monitors. They all are very particular.
You mean band members, not audience members?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
well. That's your audience is the
Oh, I
band
see,
members when
see.
you're doing
Yeah. Well,
monitors.
yeah,
Yes,
it's
yes.
more to me the real issue for me is that when you're doing monitors, you are basically you're taking a lot of the art of mixing out of it. I mean, of
Right.
course, it's still the art of mixing is very much there, but it's so much more about pleasing everyone else's preferences and egos than it is making sure that you get a beautiful mix. And when you have to deal with 10 or 25 people on the stage asking you things, it just takes away from the enjoyment of the art.
It's different. You're less like a chef, more like a waiter.
Yeah, it's more like military style, you know, you're basically following orders.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Yeah. So, have there been any big developments on the live sound end of things from when you started to today? I imagine that in-ear monitors are a big change. Are there any pieces of technology that have changed or come in new norms in the live sound world that you really think have helped you do what you do better, and you're glad are here with you now?
I mean, digital is one, and I'm sure a lot of people are gonna not love me for saying that, but I'm a big fan of digital mixing consoles live.
Hmm.
Analog sounds amazing. There's no arguing that. In many cases, it sounds better than digital, but the amount of tools that you have at disposal in a digital mixing console is just like amazing. You know, having
Hmm.
if you have 64 channels, that means that you have 64 compressors and 64 gates and whatever, all this stuff that's otherwise is just like mounts and mounts of racks on the side of your analog console. It makes it so much easier to work quickly and to get a sound.
Right. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about is your kind of process and workflow live compared to studio. In that MixCon presentation you gave us, you took us through this awesome walkthrough of your template where you got to see your signal flow, the way you have all these different aux channels set up and all these subgroups that you're working through. Do you have a similar approach when you're doing live sound, and how much of that kind of template carries over, and how many of those techniques, like the compression you might be applying on a group level, carries over to front of house?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that carries over, or the other way around that I've learned live and I've started doing in the studio. There's less of all the auxes and the subgroups. There's some of that. I do some subgroups with compression on a subgroup, but the biggest similarity is VCAs or DCAs in the case of a digital console. I really do love mixing on VCAs or DCAs. I love basically working on 10 or 12 faders or on 8 faders depending on the console, and just having all the important things there and working off of that. I'm also a big fan of working at 0 dBs, which is something it's a technique that some front of house engineers embrace and some others don't really care for. It basically consists in getting all your levels and all your gains so that the faders sit at 0 dB, and that is your starting point for every song, so that you can move away from your starting point as much as you need during the show or during the song, but you know that you can go back to that starting point and not get further and further away with every song.
Right. So I want to back up on these 2 points for the few people who this might have gone over their heads slightly. Now I want to go into it a little more with a little more depth. When you're talking about 0 dB, you're talking about keeping the fader position at the 0 point. You know, rather we're not shooting for 0 dB VU or 0 dB FS. It's my fader wants to be at 0. So that means you're doing a lot of your preliminary mixing in a way from the preamp on the console. So when does that happen? Does that happen during sound check? Does a lot of it happen during the first song? How are you getting that initial gain stage and level setting happening?
It happens during sound check, unless you are so unfortunate to not get a sound check, which often happens in in festival situations. But during sound check, I basically get all my levels. Most faders will be at 0, not all the faders, because I don't want to sacrifice gain structure for fader position. But you know, assuming you get your gains right, there's a big chance that your faders will be at 0.
Right, right. So you always have a home base you can come back to, at the
Exactly.
top of
It's
each
very
song and that
important
kind of
because
thing.
if you don't do that, you end up being so far off or away from the starting point 10 songs in that you kind of lose perspective over where you started from. Whereas if you
Right.
have that general reset point to go back to after every song, you're staying in that hole, in that, home base turf. Although, of course, I look at the show as an overall arc as well. I mix shows the way I mix records. I think of evolution from songs to song, etc., etc. Also, another thing that I do live is, because a lot of things are more compressed than you normally might want to do in a record. Um, I then undo, quote unquote, that compression with a lot of movement on the faders, so
Ah,
that
interesting.
so that
So this
the dynamic range is restored and it doesn't sound flat and too compressed.
Right. So this is interesting. A lot of people who've only done live sound at smaller venues or who haven't done it at all might be surprised to hear you say that there'd be more compression. For people who've only been in smaller venues, the two things going through their head are probably one, where am I going to get all these wonderful compressors that aren't in these really small venues? And two, won't I have problems with feedback with all that compression? But when you're talking about the larger scale venues you're usually working at, you can probably get away with a good deal of compression before having to worry about feedback compared to, some little basement venue. So give me a sense of how you'd be approaching compression uh, on a live compared to a studio record. You say you're doing more to keep things in a certain range. Is a lot of that happening on a track by track basis, just with the kind of digital EQs you're talking about, or are you doing any global compression?
I do both, but primarily channel by channel. I compress depending on what it is. Usually, from 2, 3 to 1 to up to 10 to 1, depending on what the signal is that's being compressed. And then I do a little bit on global, and that's another thing where working in the studio for me is a bridge that has taught me a lot of things. For example, I used to never do that live on the master. I did some subgroups, compression maybe on drums, things like that. But now that I tend to do it in the master in the studio, I've applied that, and I even try to use the same plugins, which is a really,
Mm.
really great way for me to be familiar with the sound, with what I'm expecting it to sound. So, for example, I'm a Mac DSP endorser, as you know from that MixCon presentation, and I love their ML4000. Now they have the ML8000, which is an eight band limiter, and I basically put that when Mac DSP is available on my digital console live, I put that on the master bus, and I know exactly what it's supposed to sound like and how much I can compress and do a nice degree of multiband compression that way.
Right, very cool. Now, what are some of the things that you find in a live setting end up needing the most dynamic range control?
Well, bass is one thing, for example, that I compress more live than in the studio, because bass can get very easily out of hand live. And then things, of course, vocals. It's if you're doing a concert, you want to make sure your singer is always heard, and so you might want to compress him more than you do in the studio. Although it's all about riding the fader, it's all about following the song, knowing, and that's where it really helps to know the music, to know when the singer is going to sing and how the singer is going to sing, and you make sure he's always heard. If you know the song, you know exactly when he's going to sing quieter and when he's going to sing louder.
Right, right. And then you had talked before about VCAs and DCAs. For those people who might not be familiar with these, what exactly are VCAs and DCAs, and how are they different than working with the buses that people might be familiar with inside Pro Tools or the DAW of their choice?
Well, a subgroup or a bus is where you send all your signals, and all your signals is routed to, so that you can actually, say, put a compressor across it. So you can make a bus or a subgroup of drums, and then you can put a compression or or an EQ on the whole drum set, rather than having to do it channel by channel, which wouldn't have the same effect. Whereas a VCA, which is a voltage controlled amplifier, or a DCA, which is the digital version of the VCA, is something where you don't actually have audio going through. So you're only controlling other faders, but without having audio going through. And so therefore you don't put a compressor across a VCA, so to speak.
Right, right. Now, also on the live end, something that some engineers don't use a ton of in the studio that may become more important live are gates. There are some engineers there who are crazy about gates in the studio too. What's your take? Do you approach gating or expanders differently live compared to studio?
I get a lot more live than in the studio because live it's much more important to have a clean stage. So I'll gate things more aggressively like toms or snare mics. In the studio, I don't do so much of it, but it also depends on the production. And of course, in the live sound, it depends on the music. If it's a rock thing, you tend to gate more aggressively, but I'm not going to be doing that much gating on a jazz drum set, for example,
Right.
because you want all the dynamics to come through, the brushes and all the quiet stuff that would otherwise get lost. Also in the studio, these days with DAWs, people tend to just select and delete regions.
Strip silence.
Yeah, or just whatever, or do it manually and
Yeah,
just
sure.
get rid of stuff that doesn't have the sound you want, or the actual sound that the mic is picking up, and so there's less of a need for gating if you do that.
Right. The biggest difference between live and studio, in my humble opinion, no beat detective. There's no beat detective in
Yeah,
live.
of course, it's much nicer. Well, it's not. It's for me live in studio. I always like to work with good bands, with good
Yeah.
musicians. So, beat detective is something that luckily I don't have to do much of. I'm fortunate enough to work with great bands.
Good, good. Yeah, I also couldn't imagine just the aesthetic of what, particularly say like a John Zorn does. I could imagine Beat Detective having a place in that. And Lou Reed too, now that I think of it, yeah. So a lot of those artists.
All of those artists are all about live, which is something I'm very much in love with. I love working with bands that play live, that play together, that play organically and play off of each other. That's much more
Right.
interesting to me than doing one instrument at a time.
I'm going to guess that Lou Reed's voice has never been auto-tuned in his life. Do you think he'd be against auto-tune as a person? He seems like the kind of person who'd be like, have a position against it.
Oh yeah, Lou had a position against most things, or for most things for that matter.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I mean, I remember when I did my first Lou Reed gig, I put some reverb on his voice, and it was literally my first gig. And I remember the lighting guy looking at me as like, "You put reverb on Lou's voice. He's gonna hate that."
Oh, wow.
I was like, "Damn, I messed up here," but he didn't
Yeah.
hate it. It's all about doing it subtly and doing, little degrees of things that you think work, and if they work, they work.
Yeah, indeed. Well, wow, this has been a lot of good info in here. When you're talking about keeping things clean on stage, I think that's another big factor that I discovered more and more when I was doing live sound was if I could get the stage volume right, then the front of house job became a lot easier and helping musicians figure out what kind of balance they should have on stage because sometimes as a front of house mixer you're fighting what's coming off of stage rather than it assisting you. So how do you work with that dynamic of stage volume? Do you have any particular notes around getting the stage volume appropriate so that you feel like that and the main mix are working together?
Yeah, again, it depends on the size of venues because if you're doing a stadium, stage volume doesn't matter. You'll never hear it from front of house. But if you're doing a
Right.
small club, and the guitar player turns on his amp and he's louder than the PA, you're going to have a problem and it's not going to be fun for anyone. So if that's the case, if you can talk to the guitar player and tell him to turn it down, then by all means do it. I mean, obviously not every guitar player is going to want to hear that, but sometimes it's necessary.
Right.
Maybe you have to take them out and let them understand why it's necessary. It depends on who you're working with. Not everyone you can ask to turn down to, but I mean, Lou Reed, for example, was one that had a huge stage volume. The minute he played a chord on the guitar, it was basically as loud as the PA if we were in a theater in a 2,000 to 3,000
Wow.
seater. He was loud and he had a lot of amps.
Yeah, I would just imagine again a kind of a medium sized or theater venue, even if the stage volume isn't a problem for the main front of house mix, it can be a problem sometimes with a monitor mix where, the guitar player who's not you next to you, it's coming out so loud that now you need your vocal to come up and now you need your vocal to come up so hot that you're pushing the monitor and now you're getting a messier and messier swirl of sound on stage where you need to do more and more EQ in the monitors and more gating on things. So there can be issues with that stuff cascading out of control. One of the things that I found helpful back in the day with guitar players or bass players who needed to really turn up to really feel that, because Lou, I'm imagining, there's a feeling he got on stage. You know, if you go up on stage and you have very little volume or power behind you, you can probably feel a little naked. But when you're up there and you hit a chord and it's like there's this army behind you, it probably helps you be more confident up there.
Of
So
course,
for those
yes.
people who needed that, one of the things that I found often was instead of pointing the amp out at the audience, point it more towards yourself. And, you know, a lot of people get that. It seems like common sense, but you'd be amazed at how many bands who are first starting to play bigger venues, first starting to get this, get more serious. That little thing hasn't occurred to them yet. Get it off the floor, maybe tilt it up, maybe tilt it towards yourself, and all of a sudden, stage volumes
Yeah.
can come down, monitors, sound check, and go a lot better. So for those of you musicians and small and medium venue people in there, I hope that one somewhat obvious tip is a useful one.
I'll actually tell you more about that because
Please.
Stuart, fantastic guitar tech for Lou Reed, Matt Brown, who was our monitor engineer, and myself were actually trying towards the end of touring with Lou to get him to turn all the amps, put them in front of everyone, pointing at them, like where wedges are, where monitors are,
Yeah.
which would actually make a lot of sense. And we were starting to experiment with that. We didn't get as very far because people are so used to having them from behind. But it's definitely something that I think more bands should experiment with because it makes a lot of sense. It's like
Yeah.
having the sound coming in front of you is going to be a lot better than having it from behind you. You
Right,
just have to
right.
get past the fact that you're so used to hearing it from behind.
Yeah. I still remember years ago that Weezer did something where they toured without any amps and they were just using, I think, like the Line 6 pods and maybe it was like the Pod
Oh, yeah.
4.0 or something at that point. And they did some shows that way. And apparently, some people really liked the sound of those, how tight and controlled and record
Of
like they
course.
were.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, people who do that, and I've seen some people do it. Dropkick Murphy was a band that used to do that. They have ISO cabs in the back of the stage where the amps are inside isolated cabs and then they're on in-ears. So basically the only thing that you hear on the stage is drums, which means you're going to have a super clean mix for everyone in the ears as well as for front of house. Those things are all things that work great if the whole band is on board with that. But some people like Lou Reed, like you said, want to feel the power behind them, and they're true rock and rollers, and they're not going to go for these more kind of modern trick
Yeah.
enhancements.
Well, it's a different aesthetic too. It's a little bit about the kind of show you're trying to put on. I mean, some acts are going to lend themselves to having more control, tighter things, kind of more sheen. But that's not what I think of when I think of Lou Reed. I'm thinking of a
Exactly.
Walk on the Wild Side. I'm thinking about things being kind of loose and swirly and human and idiosyncratic. And you're not going to get that out of ISO cabs and, you know, direct guitars and all
Yeah.
that.
And think about the aesthetics. A lot of bands are about having the wall of amps behind them. Imagine if you go see Black Sabbath and there's not the 8, what is it, Marshall or whatever Tony
Right.
uses behind him, or you
Yeah.
know, or Lenny or whoever uses all those amps. Manowar have tons of amps. You know, it's an aesthetic thing as well, and some artists really are into that and want to stick to that.
One of the things we have to remember is not everyone also in the audience is a musician or an audio nerd. They don't necessarily do the same kind of critical listening. They, to a degree, listen with their eyes, you know? And
Yeah, I guess
I've
it's
even heard of
wrong.
some
It's wrong, but
artists who really like a small, you know, sound of a small tube amp, and they'll bring one of those up on stage, but then put like a big black cloth over it. So it looks like it's a big amp, and that's what the mic is on.
everyone does different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Wild. And even honestly, us as engineers, we end up doing a lot of listening with our eyes too. If you've ever turned the EQ on the wrong channel and you're like, oh, it sounds brighter, but not quite enough. Let me keep on. Oh, why isn't it bright? Oh, it's wrong one. And before you realize it's the wrong one, you were sure you heard the difference. So I think everyone who's done audio for a while has experienced that. So just imagine what it's like for a normal audience member, you know.
Psychology.
Indeed. All right, good stuff, man. So this has, I think, been a great overview of some of the, you know, the differences and quirks of working in the live sound world compared to the studio world. On the studio front, you are in what looks to me like a very beautiful studio there in New York. What's the name of the studio you're in right now?
Yeah, this is East Side Sound. It's been in existence since 1972. It was founded by Lou Holtzman, who still is part owner and very much involved. We're actually, both him and I are about to take the studio back over from an older management that we had the last 2 years. So we're hoping that the studio will continue to stay booked, and it's one of the last really great studios in Manhattan and New York City, because there's really just East Side Sound, Sears Sound, and Electric Lady are the only big studios where you can have multiple ISO booths, etc., etc.
Right in Manhattan,
In
there
Manhattan.
used to be so many, and now there are so few. There's more that have cropped up over in Brooklyn, but
Yeah,
it's
of
still a
course.
different world.
There's great studios in Brooklyn, and there's a couple of great studios in New Jersey as well.
Yeah,
But Manhattan is still the place to be for a lot of artists. Everyone loves
indeed.
recording here. Of course, the rents are higher, and so the rates are less affordable than they might be in Brooklyn. But you usually get what you pay for in the world of studios, so it's worth paying a little bit more to have beautiful analog consoles like this, great speakers like I use Adams, or a lot of outboard, which you don't see. It's right in front of me, but there's a ton of
Yeah.
it, and it's mostly analog.
Right. And it also ends up being, the people you work with to a degree, generally the more expensive places are going to have an easier time attracting top flight talent in the production and engineering side of things. And that is honestly one of the most important piece of gear in the room is the guy who's sitting there in front of the speakers. So speaking of you and sitting in front of speakers, can you give us a little bit of a look at this spot? I'm seeing 3 sets of monitors up there, a couple Adams, a pair of Focals. What role do each of those monitors play in the studio? How do you use them?
Yes, my favorite speakers are the Adam Audio. The ones soffit mounted that you see back there
Mm-hmm.
are the S5H, which is one of their flagship products. And needless to say, they sound amazing. And if you want them to sound loud, they'll sound loud. I record and mix primarily on those.
On
And
the
when,
mains.
on the mains, yes.
Yeah.
Now that I've gotten used to them, because I've only had them for a little over a year, I believe. And then when I want to switch and get a near field position, a near field reference, I use the Adam Audio A7X, which you
Mm-hmm.
see right here. And on those, I also have a sub 10, which you don't see. It's behind the console, but it's obviously the 10-inch subwoofer that Adam Audio makes.
And are the tens only hooked up to that pair of near fields? They're not working in conjunction with any of the others, or do they work with the mains too?
They can work with the mains too, but they're not really made for that, and the mains
Yeah.
don't really need a sub because they
Right,
have
right.
plenty of low end.
Yeah, I got a bunch of those Adams in recently, and they sent me, I think it was the S5Vs, which were enormous. They were 120 pounds each.
Yeah.
I'd like deadlift them up my stairs to get them
Oh,
into the
poor
place.
you. No,
And
these
oh
are
my
these are the
goodness.
same of the
Yeah,
ones
the
that you just
horizontal.
mentioned, except for the H is for horizontal, which obviously
Yeah.
works better here. And it took us 4 people to lift them up there.
Wild. They have a lot of level. I also tried out, they sent me the S3H as the smaller version of
Yeah.
those, and even those were loud.
Yeah,
And
they're
I'm,
great sounding speakers. Great
yeah.
sounding speakers. I'm a really big fan of Adam Audio. I also have Adam Audio in my apartment in London.
All right.
So
Yeah, I have a little pair of the Adam A5Xs here. I
mhm.
reviewed those when they came with the smaller version of those A7s you have, and they're probably some of the best sounding small speakers I've ever heard. And
Absolutely.
one of the things I've liked about those, the S series, is that they sound good, but they're not necessarily flattering. Like they will tell you what's going on in the mid range, and if your mid range sounds annoying, they will let you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's something I like about them that you don't
A good
always get out
speaker
of
is
all
not a
brands.
flattering speaker. A good speaker is a
Yeah.
speaker that makes you work harder because you can hear everything. And if you make a mistake, you hear it right away and you can fix it. And also, what I like about the Adam Audio is the ribbon tweeter, which uh, is much easier on your ears. I find I can work a lot longer with a lot less ear fatigue, which obviously helps my workflow.
Yeah, it's nice to have. I always try to tell people that when they're trying to pick out speakers, that your mixes are going to sound to a degree like the inverse of your speakers. So if you're working on really bright speakers with a lot of bottom end, your mixes are going to sound kind of like the opposite of that. You're hearing so much high end all the time that you're not going to push it. You're hearing so much bottom end all the time that you're not going to push it. But if you have something that's honest and revealing in the mid range, maybe a little soft on the top end, you're going to do those things you should be doing in the mix, like controlling your mid range and bringing a little brightness and life and sizzle to things. And yeah, if you have something that already sounds that way, you're gonna get the opposite sound. It's a little counterintuitive to people, but I found it to be true.
Right.
If we could talk a little bit more about monitoring, I'm curious if headphones play any role in what you do at all. Do you need to ever kind of get on headphones to check things, or is it pretty much all happening on the speakers?
I do use headphones a lot, primarily when I travel, because I end up doing a lot of editing and sometimes even some mixing, or at least preliminary mixing in planes or trains or automobiles.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I tend to never let go of a final mix that I've only done on headphones. But what I often do is I get low-endy material like drums and bass on speakers, and then I continue mixing on headphones if I'm traveling, if I'm on tour or on a long plane journey. And then I go back to the speakers for a final listen to make sure. But it's still important to hear things properly, so I'm headphones for me are a lot like shoes for my girlfriend, you know. So I
Yeah.
have a lot of them, and I tend to switch back and forth. But some of my favorite are, I just got these Sonic Stealth in-ear
Huh.
monitors, which
Okay.
are nine. They make different versions. I have the 5 driver version and the 9 driver version. They isolate you very well from the outside world, and they're super great sounding and super flat response, I find. And so I tend to use those a lot
Mm.
recently.
Yeah, I think there's been a kind of a renaissance recently in higher end studio capable in-ear monitors that really was never thing. You never saw in-ear monitors in the studio when I was coming up, but really in the past 5 years or more, you're starting to see some people tracking with them some people using them, as like, they're singing or playing guitar or whatever, and some people getting ones that they actually, do some mixing and editing on. So
Yeah.
it's been an interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really use them in the studio, to be honest, because in the studio I use the speakers. For me, they're a replacement for speakers when I'm mobile, when
Gotcha.
I'm traveling.
Because headphones can sound so different, especially compared to speakers, have you ever tried the SonarWorks stuff, the correction when it comes to
Absolutely. In fact,
headphones?
I'm glad you mentioned that SonarWorks was sponsoring this podcast. I actually love the SonarWorks stuff, and
All right.
they've sent me the software and even some Sennheiser headphones to try with them. And I really like the software, and I use it a lot. And I think they have an excellent idea, and I look
Mhm.
forward to seeing it integrated in a lot of hardware in the
Mm.
future as well, which I know is in the works.
Right, that's their big vision that not some people don't know about is they wanna see about kinda getting this stuff, say, like, so by default, you'd have your iPhone and you'd have your earbuds that go with it, and they would automatically be corrected from within your iPhone into those earbuds, so end listeners would have this kind of flat experience, which is really interesting. I mean, I hope they get something like that off the ground because the biggest problem with inexpensive headphones, I mean, com speakers can be all over the place, but headphones are all over the place when it comes to
Yeah.
frequency response.
Yeah.
So I know that one of the things, they said the Sennheisers, like the 650s, those are already flat ones and then flatten them further.
Yes, exactly. And they sound great, but they're very big, so I don't really travel with them. I've tried them in the studio and at home. When I travel, I try to uh, go small, and
Yeah.
that's why I use in-ears. Although I'm looking forward to try the new Atom Audio headphones, which
Mhm.
I just read a super positive review, I believe in Tape Op or SonicScoop.
I have a pair of them right here. We're actually doing a, high-end headphone roundup that'll be coming
Okay,
out
yeah.
soon, and I'm gonna give my thoughts on them and a bunch of other models, in
Yeah,
there.
I have not used them yet, but AES is coming up, and I will be listening to those and using them hopefully very soon.
All right, good stuff. Yeah, with headphones, I can understand the appeal too of the in-ears on the go. You're a professional traveler, sir, so you must have it down to a science with the one small suitcase and blowing through the TSA lines and yeah.
Absolutely. TSA pre, global entry, everything that makes it go faster, lounge access, whatever works.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, TSA, bane of my existence. Don't get me started with the TSA. Anyway, onwards to brighter and more beautiful things. Speaking of brighter and more beautiful things, we're looking at your beautiful studio. You said there's some analog gear in there that's pretty. Can we take a look around? Can you give us a sense for what the for those people watching on video, what the studio there looks like?
Sure. Let me move my laptop this way. So here's a beautiful Harrison Series 10 analog console, which is a digitally controlled analog console, which means the sound comes in analog, goes out analog, and is never converted to digital. But you can do all the things you can do on a digital console, meaning automating faders, insert, EQ, sends, and everything. And then if I tilt the laptop around, you can see a lot of great outboard there. So I don't know how well you can see, but there's the usual classics, LA2, LA4, 1176.
There was a couple of distressors there in the upper left.
Distressors, yes.
Yeah. Oh, and then some, are those the stay levels below them?
Those are Altex below them. We have
the
a lot of
Altex, yeah.
old
little hard to
Altex
see.
gear. And then there's Ampex 351s, which were designed by Les Paul, somebody I worked with closely in 2005. This is a Harrison Lineage preamp, which is the same brand that makes the console. API, Trident B range. Then we have Vintech X73s.
You don't see a ton of Vintex. I had a pair of the Vintex and then the 473s. They were some of the better sounding Neve emulations out there.
I 100% agree. I love these. I love these and I use them every single day. We have Universal Audio, more Altex, Ted Fletcher Pro. Then down here, I actually really like this. There's a preamp called Swing Proceed, which is made in Japan, and it's super clean sounding. So if you're not looking to color your sound very much, that is a great choice.
And that's interesting because you have a pretty colorful rack there with the UAs. Those are some really colorful pre's. You got the Altex, which I imagine have a lot of character. Then you got the Neves, and then you got your super clean. I'm curious, what do you use those universal audios on? What do you find yourself using those 2610s on these days?
All sorts of stuff. Honestly, mostly keys these days, and vocals sometimes. But the Vintech I end up using a lot with stuff that has a lot of low end, so they sound great on bass, and I tend to use them on bass a lot. The Ampex are really great too. If you see above the patch bay, there's two more Ampex. I believe those are called 651s. They used to be in a small suitcase, so you'd have a portable reel-to-reel with that preamp in it. You have two of those. So lots of choices for coloration in the studio.
Yeah, wonderful. Good stuff, man. Thanks for pointing us around here. This is it's a great looking space. And can you tell us a little bit about the scale of the live room? Obviously, we're not going to have you take your laptop in there, but
I can if you want me to, but
whoa, up to you.
I'm happy to. Can you still hear me if I walk away?
Yeah, we'll switch to your laptop audio for this this bit.
I don't know if the internet connection will be very good.
We'll find out.
Hopefully. So here I am in the live room. It's got a Steinway B piano, a B3 organ with Leslie, drums, Fender Rhodes keyboards. It's a pretty sizable space. I've done about 15 strings in here. Wow. And then the great thing about the studio is that everywhere you see a door or a window, there's an ISO booth. So you can have up to 7 musicians completely isolated because we have 6 ISO booths.
Nice.
The largest one will fit drums or pianos in it, and it's here.
I think it's so well isolated that we're going to lose your internet connection as you step in there. That is some serious isolation. It must be like a Faraday cage, because as soon as you get close to the ISO booth, it's so well isolated that not even Wi-Fi can enter.
So have you lost me, or am I still with you?
Yeah, you're back now. You're back now.
Okay, cool. But yeah, basically where you see doors and windows, there's different ISO booths. So we have 6 ISO booths.
Sweet, wow.
Every room has windows to the live room. So every room sees the live room. The piano can be in the live room, or it can be in that booth that I showed you. And then every room has one of these headphone mixers. So every musician in these 6 ISO booths plus the live room can make their own headphone mix.
Yeah, when you're in a place like New York City, you have to have really intelligent design like this. It's just a great use of space.
Yeah, it's not super huge, but very well designed. And yeah, we actually designed it in 2000 when we opened it. And then Frank Commentali designed the control room that we're in.
Right. It's so interesting, even on your little laptop speaker through Skype, which is not the best audio quality, I can hear the difference between this tight, dry control room and the slightly, more live and open live room.
Yeah.
It's cool to hear that even on this limited audio connection here. When I talked to Mark before we started this thing, we said we'll talk about live sound, we'll see the studio, and we'll check out some mics. He's like, I have a whole bunch of really interesting, unusual mics. A lot of these guys probably haven't seen that I want to show off. We got to do this. Can you show us some of these? You talked about, I think, at least 3 models I think are really unique, unusual designs that probably a lot of people in the audience aren't familiar with that you're a big fan of. Can you show us a couple of these?
I'm, like every engineer, I love my toys, and here are some of my favorites that I want to show you because they're also some of the most unusual mics nowadays. One of my absolute favorite is this very large microphone made
that looks like an active stereo ribbon, I'm gonna guess.
It's more than just active. It is a stereo ribbon, and it does, I don't know if you can see, but it does both left and right or MS. It's by a Polish company called HUM, H-U-M. They I think they pronounce it HUM. HUM Audio Devices. And it's a ribbon that has built-in preamps. So you can actually connect this either through a preamp or directly use its preamps and go directly line level. And if you do that, then you get this little box here, which is the remote control, which works on a regular XLR, and you can put in your control room. So when I have this in the live room, I can control the gain of the built-in preamps with these 2 knobs. And then, of course, it has phase inversion, air boost, MS decode, dim, and things like that. And that's a fantastic mic that I really, really love. And another mic I want to show you that I've been using a lot is these Erlund mics. That's a Swedish company. They make fantastic condenser mics. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but they have triangular.
Yeah, I saw these at NAMM or AES. I was blown away. It was the first time I've seen any shape other than circle for a diaphragm.
Exactly. And if
now, what's the point with that? It's supposed to be about resonances or something?
It's supposed to basically eliminate as much of the, what is the exact word? Basically, they demonstrated with a water, a drop of water that goes into a bucket of water that's circular. You see the drop fall, and then you see the waves come off the drop and going to the edges of the circular bucket and then coming back in, which is basically resonance that comes back if the drop were indeed an audio signal. Now, if you take a triangular bucket of water and you drop a drop of water in there, you will see, or an object, you will see that those sound waves or water waves, sound moves just like water, which is why they demonstrate it that way, the waves will dissipate in the 3 corners. So you don't have any of those waves coming back and creating these residual resonances. So it's a super clean microphone that's great for high trains and stuff. And so I really recommend it, and I love that mic. I also have this, which is one of my favorite condenser mics that I use for vocals. It's called a JZ, nothing to do with the rapper.
Right.
Or with John Zorn, for that matter. It's called the black hole microphone because it's got a hole in the middle.
I see that.
And it has, this is the BH1, and then there's the BH1S, which is the special version of it that has more features than just this one, this one has 3 polar patterns to select from, and the BH1S also has other features.
It's kind of a cheeky design because in so many, retro style tube mics, that's exactly where the tube would be.
Yeah.
And there's a big hole.
Well, it's not a tube, it's a condenser. But but I love this condenser so much that I wrote the company and I said, can you make me a stereo version of this? Because it really was an incredible mic. And one thing that's interesting about this is they have a regular circular diaphragm, but it's gold sputtered. And so they said, yes, we will make you a stereo version. And what they did is this stereo flamingo, which looks like this.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this.
Stereo microphone.
Yes.
You've seen it, but you have not seen this. What you've seen is the stereo flamingo, which they sell through Violet microphones. But this
Right.
is the same body of that mic that you've seen, but with the gold sputtered capsules that are on the BH1S. So this is a special version that they made just for me and that I use a lot when I want to do stereo recordings that are with a condenser rather than with the ribbon, because when I do stereo with a ribbon, this is the mic to go for that. And then the last mic I'll show you is called Remic. This is a company from Denmark that I've started working with because they make great mics for strings. They're very peculiar mics, very interesting looking. This is the mic for the upright bass.
Oh, I've seen this one. It goes kind of into the bridge, right? It's almost like a piece of foam.
It goes not in the bridge, but in the tailpiece. So if you
That's
imagine the body of the bass being here and the tailpiece being here,
It's behind the bridge.
You stick that in like that. And the
Yes.
interesting design is that it has a mic on the top and a mic on the bottom. So it's actually two mics that pick up the sound coming from the bridge and from the wood, and it mixes them together. They make this microphone for upright bass, which is my favorite. They also make it for violin, for viola, and for cello. And for every mic that they make a live version and a studio version, which is part why I like them so much, because I'm a live and a studio sound engineer. On the last mic, Patton, shows that we talked about at the beginning of the show, we used all remics for the violin section. For 12 strings, had all remic microphones. The live version of it, which has a lot less bleed than any other mic I've used on strings, because it's got a very tight polar pattern, whereas the studio version, I believe, has an omni polar pattern, so it's more open and more realistic sounding.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, yeah, I remember I saw them, I want to say a year or so ago. They didn't even have a booth yet, but someone from the company has had one of these in their hands, and they gave it to me and they said, "Guess what this is?" I was like, "I don't know. It's a piece of foam with a wire." And they're like, no, it's a mic. And it's wild. It attaches. And I guess one of the things that we were selling people on too is that if you have like this old Stradivarius violin or whatever, it's not going to mark it up, that it's this thing that you can have physically attached to the instrument without you worrying about it doing anything to the wood or the finish or that kind of thing.
Exactly. It doesn't alter the finish. It goes between the wood and the tailpiece. It's very discreet, very soft, doesn't scratch the wood, etc., etc.
Right. Good stuff. Wild. Well, those are 4 very unique and unusual microphones.
Yes.
What's the last thing?
The last thing I'm going to show you is this. This is a Nordust cable. I can't show you the 2 ends because I'm using it to record my voice. But if I go to the machine room, I have another 50 of these. These are sadly very expensive, but you get what you pay for. I have XLRs, 1/4 inches, different versions. This is a company based in Boston. They're called Nordust. And every conductor inside this cable is wrapped by oxygen. And as you know, oxygen is the best insulator. And so with these cables, if you go on YouTube, you can find a video where I demonstrate using these cables versus a regular cable with the same mic and the same preamp on the same source. And even on YouTube, with the compression that comes from being uploaded, being streamed, you can hear a clear difference between a regular cable and this cable with 2 matched pairs of microphones and preamps. It's like somebody lifts the veil of the sound.
Wild. I've never heard of that. Oxygen insulated. So there's like literally a gap between the inner cable and the outer insulation.
Yeah, in fact, every conductor has it. So in an XLR, there's 3 conductors. So there's 3 oxygen insulation devices, which are achieved with a coil around the 3 conductors. And then I think there's yet a 4th one around the outside edge of the cable.
Well, that is wild. You're like audio Batman with all of these wild toys. Where do you get these wonderful toys?
I research and I look for the best sounding stuff because it is our responsibility as engineers to make sure that we record everything the best way we can. It's important for us, it's important for the people, and it's important for posterity. There's so much audio that's being recorded every single day in the world, and it's like taking pictures with an iPhone or taking pictures with a camera, you're going to hear these things for years to come. And you don't want them sounding lousy 10 years from now, let alone 50 years from now. So I believe, and I really stand by this, it's important to record at the highest quality possible. That's why I research the best mics, the best cables, the best preamps. That's why I never record at low sampling rates or bit depths. All of that is very important to me.
Well, fantastic. Marc, this has been great stuff.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of
A couple
my
quick
pleasure.
notes for those of you who are listening. Number one, another quick shout out to our sponsors, one of which was SonarWorks. SonarWorks, thank you guys for sponsoring. Marc talked about them and using their headphone correction stuff. They also do room and speaker correction. You can get one of their packages with a built-in mic. It'll measure the idiosyncrasies of your room and speakers so that you can actually correct for the quirks in your room and have an even sweeter sweet spot. Another big thanks to Eventide. Check them out at eventideaudio.com. They've been making some of the most far out and interesting effects for the past 40 something years. So check them out, eventideaudio.com. Most of their original classics, one by one, have been ported over into kind of plug-in form in their Anthology X bundle. I think it's now the Anthology 11 bundle they're up to already. So fantastic stuff there. If you are checking this out when it comes out, we currently have a giveaway of the Eventide Anthology bundle. This is like $3,000 worth of plugins you can get for free if you check them out. SonicScoop.com/contest. That's SonicScoop.com/contest. If you see this a lot later, there'll probably still be a contest going on. We have contests constantly all the time, giving away free stuff. And yes, someone really does win every single time. Check it out at SonicScoop.com/contest. Last, certainly not least, you are hearing my voice through a Focusrite interface. Thank you guys for sending me this Focusrite Claret. Sounds great. Really some of the most best bang for the buck stuff out there in interface world, from the very inexpensive Scarlett all the way up to the RedNet series. Check them out if you're shopping for an interface. I've been using this one on every podcast. Never gives me any trouble. Sounds great. Hope you like the sound of it. You probably do. My voice sounds pretty great. All right. Without any more of my jibba jabba, one last big thank you to Mr. Marc Urselli. Marc, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. And can I, if I may add so,
please.
Focusrite, which you just mentioned, has, as you know, in 2009, acquired Atom Audio. So I'm actually very happy to be on a podcast that's sponsored by one of the companies that I love and endorse. And so it's even though, you know, you got the sponsor from Focusrite is basically the same company now, and they make amazing stuff.
You said 2009. I know you meant 2019. I'm going to clear the record for anyone out there that 2019. I was surprised by that. Focusrite acquired Atom.
I was surprised too, but hey, if it leads to better things, why not? You know,
good stuff, man.
There's a lot of great stuff coming out from both of those companies. So.
And Atom is not, as of yet, technically a sponsor of this podcast, but I did check out a bunch of their monitors along with a whole bunch of others. If you are into the idea of shopping for monitors, and the reason I wanted to ask Marc so much about monitoring is I just did a big article about great studio monitors. For those of you who are ready to spend $3,000 up to $8,000, I have a roundup of some of the most popular monitors in those price ranges, and I give you my kind of tasting notes on them and try to help guide you into selecting which ones might be best for you based on your taste and approach. I think it's called The Best Monitors for the Serious Project Studio. Check that one out at SonicScoop.com. Now, before we let you go, Marc, the people want to find out more about you. If they want to connect with you, where are the best places for them to do that?
Absolutely. Very easy. If you know how to pronounce or write my first and last name, it's Marc with a C, no K, no other letters, M-A-R-C. And then the last name is spelled U-R like Robert, S like Sam, E-L-L-I. So my website is www.marcurselli.com. My Instagram is instagram.com/marcurselli. The Facebook is Facebook/marcurselli. The Twitter is, everything is /Marc Urselli. So I'm very easy to find online and very approachable. You can write me with questions. Anything you want to know about the gear I use or what I do, I'm happy to answer emails.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Marc. Thanks to all of our wonderful sponsors for this week's episode. I'll tell you that if you type Marc's name wrong into the search engine machine there, you'll probably still get him. He's kind of a big deal. Thank you, you good big deal, sir, for coming on the show. Thank you guys for hanging out with us for this episode of the Sonic Scoop Podcast. See you next time.
Thank you.